You know, when I came into Congress 4 short years ago, our national debt was $19.6 trillion. Now, I'm not going to say the Trump administration were not spenders. They were too much. But it was about deficit spending about $350 billion a year. And that included the tax cuts. All right, so we can talk about that. So COVID hits, and it was very bipartisan. We spent nearly $5 trillion in that year, in 2020. It was bipartisan on all the CARES programs, on the PPP, on the IDLs, on the hospitals, on the schools, on everything. Then the state funding as well. Okay, so we drove ourselves, ramped up to $25 trillion in a hurry. COVID, you know, a once in a century, it better be issue. If we didn't spend nearly $1 trillion, for instance, on some of those issues, we really could have gone into a depression. I believe that, because people were being told to stay home. Businesses would not have been able to retain them as they did through the PPP. There would have been unemployment and everything else, but those businesses would have imploded. We would have had an implosion, particularly of small businesses. So anyway, that was a bipartisan effort. We took care of that. The problem is that when Biden came in, they wanted to take credit for, I don't know, somehow or another spending trillions of dollars would give them credit for the recovery. And the first thing was the rescue plan. And of course, you know, famously you had Larry Summers saying, don't do that. It's about 3 times too high. And I did the math on it. I was former revenue secretary. I was on the budget committee for the United States House of Representatives last term. I knew the numbers too. I agreed with Larry Summers. It was 3 times too high. It shouldn't have been 1.2, 1.3 trillion. It should have been about 400 billion at that point. And you know what that was for? That was mainly for states, because states didn't get, in that, hard to believe, in that year previous, $5 trillion. But it was needed. But let's face it, we know it was high because even Pennsylvania has $3 billion in a rainy day fund that we've never had before. And just up until a month ago, Governor Wolf thought it was a wonderful idea to send out $2,000 checks because he had nothing else to do with the money, all right? Which ignites inflation. So the deal is this. I mean, every one of those bills, from CHIPS to transportation infrastructure, I worked on the transportation infrastructure bill with my problem solvers group. 29 Republicans, 29 Democrats. I was in the lead on that. We had a great plan. And you know what that bill should have cost? That bill should have cost about $800 billion. Instead, they brought it up to $1.2 billion. I still almost voted for it. But $240 billion for EV credits and charging stations, I still almost voted for it. I was the last one on the floor that day. I was watching. I ended up voting no because it was excessive. It was just absolutely excessive. And I still don't even like how the money is being allocated, because I can't even get answers on exactly where the money went to the states. It's at our Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. Where is it? Where are the projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you know, and the CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act, I worked with Mike McCall. I can't even tell you the number of players involved. The CHIPS Act was very important to our national security. You know, 94% of the chips in the world are made in Taiwan. 4% are made in China. 2%, or maybe I'm off by 2%, 2% are made here, and another 2% like in the Netherlands. So it's heavy, obviously very heavy in Taiwan, and for a lot of reasons. I spoke with CEOs of Intel, I spoke with the CEOs of Micron, I spoke to the CEOs of chip manufacturers. And we saw the problems with automobiles and so many other things, you name it, in the supply chain issue. So we needed that bill to pass. That bill should have been, if it would have been perfect, it should have been $60 billion. I could have lived with 80, 90, 100. They made it $240 billion. And you want to know what? That last $140 billion, that came on in the last few days. I mean, I couldn't believe it. So anyway, I wasn't able to vote for that in the end, but I am very supportive of the need for that bill. I just couldn't vote for the excesses that were part of that. So there's so many of these excesses that take place. But talking about inflation, right? The number one cause of inflation, and the problem is this. I wrote an op-ed on this that you guys didn't print, but how the Biden administration and the Fed are working against each other in two ways. Because one, the Fed stopped the stimulus spending and Biden continued the spending, right? So when you have too many dollars chasing too few goods, that causes inflation. But the biggest cause is the absolute assault taking place on our domestic energy, on American energy. And guys, this is not a theory, it's not an attack, it's not an accusation, it's not a political campaign pitch. It's happening. It's happening from regulations, it's happening on pipeline permits, it's happening on the administration literally warning, threatening in the investment banking community they're going to put their assets at risk if their carbon footprint in their investments. I'm quoting John Kerry, who's the so-called green energy czar, has said that to banks, and I don't mean just the Goldman Sachs of the world. I mean local banks, and I'm not going to get into the names of the local banks whose presidents have told me this. Don't fund coal companies. Don't fund natural gas. Don't fund oil. And the damage that this is doing, it's rippling the whole supply chain, because there's a lot more to it than going up at a gas station, obviously. So the investment taking place through that supply chain is being rattled, and because we are 3 million barrels a day less in oil than we were at the end of 2019, or the beginning of 2020, call it, for 2019. 3 million barrels a day. The Keystone pipeline that Biden so jubilantly canceled on day one, which made no sense, because that would be the cleanest oil coming from Canada, et cetera, et cetera. That was about 1.5 million barrels a day. Right
I
there.
just want to interject. You said it was the cleanest oil? Because my understanding is that it's the tar sands oil that they're...
Well, you're right about that.
That's not clean oil.
But it's necessary heavy oil, and now we're trying to get it from Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. So I don't have the science on why but we just know the pollutant requirements in the USA and Canada are a hell of a lot better than Venezuela. That's my point on that one. And yet, we're pleading with Venezuela. OPEC has us under control. Vladimir Putin, is the horrible individual that he is, invades Ukraine. And now any geopolitical event sets the world pricing off on oil and natural gas. If we were energy independent, there would have been some effects. Nowhere near $4 gallon gasoline. Farmers, groceries, fertilizer, you know the story.
How do you define energy independence?
Well, we had it. Energy that is produced from United States, or you could even argue North American resources, and that we're able to utilize for ourselves. And once we utilize for ourselves, we could be an exporter as well.
But as I understand it, when we talk about energy independence, it doesn't mean that we're producing all the energy that we need. When we were producing, we were exporting and producing more than we were importing. We've never, probably since the 50s, actually been energy independent, correct?
No, we were literally energy independent in the last year and a half of the Trump administration.
In what sense? I mean, what's the gauge that you use for energy independence?
We had enough energy to sustain our own needs. Now, some companies, because what we're shipping elsewhere, we're selling it elsewhere because they could get a better price. I mean, at that point, it's a marketable product. But we did not need oil or anything from Saudi Arabia. We did not need to import. We would only do it by business choice as opposed to need. And today, it is clearly a need.
As I understand it, in most months in the Biden administration, isn't it true that exports have ran ahead of imports?
That is not my understanding whatsoever.
I think the data's there.
Well, I could probably Google it right now. I mean, we do not export more of our own domestic energy than, I don't think we're exporting any right now. So let's check that one out. I don't believe we're exporting any. All I know is what the gas and oil companies tell me, and what every day there's an article on this in the Wall Street Journal. And when I speak with when I speak with former energy secretaries, Mike Pompeo, I mean, we have a lot of access to people. I mean, but data is data. Okay, even you know what, we in my Foreign Affairs Committee, we oversee the State Department. They'll admit it as well, but then they tend to pivot and say, oh yeah, what about those 9,000 wells that aren't being accessed and aren't being drilled? The permits are issued. You know, my answer to that is, are you kidding? Okay, with oil at $90 a barrel, who wouldn't open up if there was oil there? Who wouldn't open that up and start accessing it? I mean, every oil company's not Exxon, but why wouldn't Exxon too? At $90 a barrel, what, another 100,000 barrels a day are going to cost them money? It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument.
You know, regarding inflation, isn't it the problem? Isn't it kind of rooted as a global problem with supply chain issues, and with regard to gas prices? You know, international affairs such as the war in Ukraine and Saudi decisions based on production affect the price of gas more so than anything the government in the United States can do.
Not if we're independent. Why do you think he accessed the reserves, which hasn't been done? You know, Bush was going to do it, I think, right after 9/11, and they didn't even then. All right, our reserves are down. There's like 30% left. I mean, they're down like 70%, and that they weren't done because of emergency. They were done to lower price. That wasn't really the game plan. I mean, come on. Soon as Saudi Arabia says they're going to cut back 2 million barrels, gas has gone up 20 cents in the futures markets, 25 cents. And you know, it's also a little hypocritical. You know, you have many of my colleagues, that Democrats, that are saying, oh my God, what we should do is we should retaliate on Saudi Arabia for how dare they cut back. Well, didn't Joe Biden cut back? And the 2 million to 3 million barrels I just discussed, wasn't Keystone all about cutting back? And listen, Pete Buttigieg is on record in hearings telling people, well, we might have to face a little bit of pain, but this is a good thing because it'll encourage people to buy electric vehicles and go green. Okay? He said it. So that's their ideology. They're far more interested in ideology than outcomes. You know, I'm a business person. I did that for nearly 25 years. You check your ego and your ideology at the door, right? It's about outcomes. And that's how it should be right now for us, and we could straighten out a lot. It wouldn't come plummeting down. I mean, there's no doubt, you know, with the complete utter mess caused by Putin and the excessive reliance Europe has had on Russian natural gas and oil. Sure, you know, real disruptions. But if we, as we should be doing, looking after our own national interests first, we wouldn't be experiencing it, and we'd probably be able to help more in Europe. Natural gas is half the carbon emissions, okay, of oil and of coal. And let me just throw this in there. Do you know that we live in the anthracite region? My district has a lot of operable anthracite coal mines, quarries, you name it, right? we've had for generations, they were barely operating up until 2 years ago. And I won't say barely operating, but anthracite's being used worldwide up until 2 years ago, almost exclusively, except for some local people that buy it for their coal stoves, for a raw material in steel. Japan, everybody's buying anthracite. Now the coal plants, which we have 20% of our electricity in Pennsylvania, still comes from coal, still that high, but it's bituminous. It's not the anthracite, because the anthracite is more expensive. And it's used for other things, filters, steel. But right now, anthracite is booming. They can't make enough. Why? Because they're using it for energy. Why? Because the US has cut back. Yes, the Putin issue, right? But these disruptions. So it works against itself. So, but yeah, of course, carbon emissions. Look, I used to say, hey, I'm not an environmentalist, I'm a conservationist. No, I'm an environmentalist. Why not, right? But we need a reasonable plan. When you got a guy like Gavin Newsom saying we're going to have all electric vehicles in 13 years, what do you base that on? I mean, is there any scientific data to support that? You know, they've done computer models on that. Even if it got to 50% of new car purchases by 2035, they say there's no way the power grid could sustain that. So it's just unrealistic, ideological, agenda, as opposed to let's do this, right? Let's call. I never argued when Biden called natural gas a transitional, but you know what? My idea of transitional and his idea are about 15-year difference, at least. You know, let's get there. Solar's great. I mean, who could argue with solar? EVs, hybrid. Now you have a few problems with EVs. That's what happens when you rush things, right? That's when the free market, that's when the heavy-handed government screws things up. I mean, did you see in Florida, all these EVs that are just spontaneously combusting? 10 in Collier County. The batteries get waterlogged and they corrode, and the fire department can't even put them out. At first they were saying, yeah, it takes us like 3 or 4 times. It's a waste of resources. They're just letting them burn now. Because now I'm not saying all EVs are going up in flames, but they're great, in so many ways. But it can't. You do these government mandates. The average EV, by the way, is $55,000. It goes about 250 miles on a charge. And then, back to Gavin Newsom. Buy EVs, but don't charge them. Right? That's fair. It's actually what happened.
With regard to taxes, the Republican plan talks about pro-growth tax policies. What type of changes would you like to see in federal tax policy?
We very simply, we need to make sure that our businesses, large and small, are the most competitive in the world. Now, or at least close, because we're the USA. Let's face it. So we can, our cost of business can be a little bit more than Vietnam, right? I mean, but I mean, we got healthcare, we got our pollutant controls, we got other added costs. That's all well and good. But if we think that you can increase taxes and it's not going to have an effect on where businesses locate and where they source from, we're not dealing with reality. And when the Trump tax cuts took place in 2017, lowering that corporate rate from 35 to 21, and every Democrat screamed, "Oh my God, it's a tax giveaway to the rich. This is awful. This is awful." And then we had a 2% reduction in income tax, and basically a 20% federal income tax reduction for small business. That was a boom for small business. Right? Every chamber will tell you. I have friends that said, I did the math. I think I can hire another person I'm going to expand, I'm going to grow. It makes a difference. It's a cost of business. And one of the problems right now is, with higher interest rates and inflation, and believe it or not, they're actually talking about raising taxes. If they win the House and kept the Senate, yeah, we would see, they just want to get rid of, just because I called them the Trump tax cuts. I don't call them that just so they don't, put them in their crosshairs. Let's just call it, competitive, gaining of more competitive tax rates. And all that repatriation that the Ciscos and the Microsofts and the Apples said they were going to do with a lower corporate rate, they've done. They're doing it. It wasn't going to happen overnight, but they're doing it. These things, the marketplace will. There's nothing wrong with government encouraging, right? Even encouraging your ideology, but don't make heavy-handed moves on taxes and regulations and energy that weaken our position in the competitive world.
The Republican plan talks about saving and strengthening Medicare and Social Security. How would you go about doing that?
Well, it's a tough one, and not too much talk about it these days, and there should be, because we have so many other crises that have developed in the last 20 months. So, and of course COVID, but what we need is people pay into Medicare, people pay into Social Security. Let me just go on the record here. When people work for 35 years of their life and 6.2% of their pay is matched by their employer, 6.2%, that's 12.4% over a 40-year period. You know what? That should certainly be enough. That's a good investment for that individual to receive Social Security just as it is. I don't accept the idea that Social Security is in any danger whatsoever. It needs to be sustained. And if it's not sustained, then certain things need to be changed, like maybe raising the cap, but that's truly a tax increase, right? So the guy who pays up to $118,000, or the woman, I think that's the cap about right now, raise it to $140,000. Well, now he's paying another 6.2%, as is the employer. So, but it must be sustained. It's very important. Real simple. It's got to be sustained. Now changing the ages a little bit, changing some things for those under 45, maybe those under 35. Those are things that even Steny Hoyer, the current majority of the House, said to me, you know what, Dan, we're going to have to hold hands and jump on that one, because nobody's going to like that, right? But if that's what we need to do, slight changes, and I don't even necessarily mean lower payments, because let's face it, I mean, Social Security is, I don't know exactly, I mean, it varies with the individual, but $2,000, $2,100, $2,200, $2,300 a month, maybe $2,600 a month. So that's so Social Security needs to remain. Medicare, there's inefficiencies, and I'm not for a single payer system. I'm for competition. I am absolutely for, Medicaid is a very important for lower income. There were aspects of Obamacare that, Obamacare was really an expansion of Medicaid, right? If you really just define it, it was an expansion of Medicaid. And by the way, Medicaid was the least favorable of the public insurances that we offer. So, it's one reason I wasn't necessarily a big fan. But look, employer-based healthcare is the best usually. Clearly when people turn 65, with certain conditions they turn 60, it should be regularly analyzed, and we should be looking to make it more efficient. Here's something I disagree with Republicans on. I can offer you this. You didn't ask that question, but pharmaceutical drugs. A bill was passed in the House. First of all, the one on insulin, I voted yes on. All right, to cap insulin. Now, unfortunately, that's only for public health care, right? Medicare basically, and Medicaid, not for private. You can't help. We need to lower the cost of insulin. It's skyrocketed, and it's a problem for a lot of people. But the one I disagree with the Republicans on is I see no reason whatsoever, it doesn't make any sense, frankly, that Medicare, HHS, CMS does not negotiate drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, directly with the drug, with Big Pharma. Doesn't make any sense. And even their plan that the Democrats proposed, doing it with the first 20 most popular, most 30 most popular, all good. Here's the reason I voted against it. One could argue it's not just allowing the largest purchaser in the world of pharmaceutical drugs to negotiate directly with the vendor. I mean, that almost sounds ridiculous not allowing that, right? But they put the Democrats put a penalty on if that drug maker did not negotiate, then they would be fined 95% of the cost of the drug. That's, you know what kind of negotiation that is? That's like Godfather style. You're either going to take this price or I'm going to fine you 95%. That's not a fair negotiation. So they didn't need that. You know, that's almost a takeover, not a negotiation. So they didn't need that. And they said, well, then we couldn't get our best prices. Well, that's still not a negotiation. So some sort of you know what? They would negotiate. They need to sell to Medicare and to the federal government. They would negotiate. So do that. I'm all in, and I think that would bring down the cost of drugs quickly. Not under this long-range plan that they had in one of their most recent bills. Because people aren't feeling the effects of it today, and they won't tomorrow. It's like 3 years off. There's no reason for that.
Let's talk about election integrity, and do you think it's unfair that some of your critics and Democrats are labeling you as an election denier?
No, nobody's saying that. No, it's a serious subject. I am certainly, I think I would actually say I'd be willing to fight to my death to assure that any citizen of the United States has access to vote. Now, am I an election denier? Am I undermining democracy because I think some form of ID should be required? I don't think I'm undermining our republic because I think that somebody should be able to provide some level of identification. Now, you know, back to perhaps the larger question. You know, what went on in the 2020 election, and mail-in ballots. But again, well, let me sort of maybe start at the beginning. I have no problem with mail-in ballots as long as we know that individual is the one that's submitting the mail-in ballot. Drop boxes and, you know, universal registration. So anytime you engaged in any sort of activity with the Social Security Department and/or driver's licenses, you immediately get registered. That doesn't exist today, but that is what the Democrats' H.R. 1 called for. And to legalize ballot harvesting. I don't think ballot harvesting is proper. Okay, I mean, if you're taking, I think the law right now is 2 ballots, or maybe it's not, but if you have somebody knocking on doors, hey, Mrs. Jones, did you vote yet? Oh, could you vote for whoever it might be, Mr. X, Mrs. X? Oh, hey, you want me to help you fill out that ballot, and I can take it for you too. That's wrong. I'm not for that. That's ballot harvesting. That is illegal right now in Pennsylvania. Ballot boxes. Here's where I'm going with it. What happened in 2020, and this is indisputable. And I don't say anything was stolen. I don't say there was any fraud. Okay, I don't go on record saying that, but I will tell you what happened. And what happened was, we have election laws, and the United States Constitution says the only one that can change the time, place, and manner of election is the state legislator. And, you know, they passed Act 77, somebody could easily argue that that's unconstitutional. All you gotta do is read the 4 provisions in the Pennsylvania Constitution of what, so they passed it though. Okay, it hasn't been contested by the Supreme Court, or maybe it has, and they didn't agree. The state Supreme Court, that's a whole different issue. But when the Secretary of State, an appointed individual by the governor's office, says, 6 weeks before the election, that mail-in ballots, we don't have to have signature matches, that we're going to put ballot boxes pretty much wherever you want, that curing of ballots is A-OK, that's not right. You can't change election rules without the legislator making them legal, making them lawful.
A state Supreme Court should have no power to decide whether these things violate state constitutions?
Sure they do.
I mean, all of these things.
They have complete power.
All of these things went through the process that you're talking about.
No, we didn't
These
vote.
things were done. The people who didn't like them sued, and it went through the court systems.
Act 77
And
is fine.
the state
Well,
Supreme Court
it's not fine.
upheld those actions. The federal system either didn't intervene. So all of these things were done within the system.
Oh, no.
And it's kind of like the same
Well,
issue that maybe people on the other side have with
Well, the
the
state Supreme Court
U.S.
is wrong.
Supreme Court, that they think it's politicized.
Hold on.
Your argument is that the state Supreme Court is politicized, right?
It is big time. Now, it needs to pass the legislator. They can't rule on something that the governor, the United States Constitution couldn't be more clear. State legislators determine the time, place, and manner of elections. Our Secretary of State made changes. And yes, it was a lawsuit, and our extremely political Supreme Court, who justices campaigned on some of these issues, by the way, which they should have been recused from because of that, said no, we can live with it. They would not, overturn the rules being made by the Secretary of State. But that still doesn't make it lawful. I mean, it's clear as day in the U.S. Constitution.
But I think-
who sets the So let me ask you this.
But our
If they
system is
said
that the courts have the ultimate
but
decision.
but you skip the legislator. You skip the legislator. You skip what the the U.S. Supreme Court should have taken this up, and they didn't. I was fully confident they were going to in the end, or well after the election. But they didn't. They should have. Even Clarence Thomas said it is inexplicable why we're not taking this up, because they don't want to appear political. But Dave, I'm just going to tell you, we'll have different opinions on this. I think we have a highly political state Supreme Court, and what they did was wrong. Supreme Courts are wrong on occasion throughout our history. They had no business accepting the will and rulemaking by an appointed Secretary of State. That was wrong.
So while we're on the topic, let's talk about the amicus brief that was filed with the
Sure.
Supreme Court on that Texas case. Looking back on that and your vote not to certify the vote, do you think that has kind of given fuel to a fire that is still burning and that has convinced quite a lot of Americans that the 2020 election did involve fraud? Not that you're making that allegation, but it would seem the actions that you and some of your fellow legislators took seem to have buttressed that whole opinion.
Maybe. But here's the thing. The amicus brief, I was informed, not instructed, but informed by some constitutional lawyers that I listened to, that the letter that I signed was not part of the lawsuit. We needed a vehicle to ask the U.S. Supreme Court to review the Pennsylvania election rules / laws that are just changes. It was not, I was not part of I'm not a lawyer. not a judge. I don't know what it's called. The gist of the brief, I was part of the request asking for Pennsylvania to be reviewed by the Supreme Court. And as I just said, I believe what was done was unconstitutional by making those changes. And I don't know why they did it either. There was no real reason to do what they did. But anyway.
So how about the vote not to certify?
Yeah,
After everything that happened on January 6th.
All right, fair. I'll explain
How
that.
do you
No, I'll explain that.
justify
Here's what happened. First of all, January 6th was a really, really bad day. I was there. I was on the House floor at 1 o'clock. Mike Pence came in, everything else. The whole thing, they voted to decertify. They voted for Arizona first. Josh Hawley or somebody came in. Actually, I think it was Ted Cruz. I don't remember exactly. Came in and went through the procedures for doing a vote on certification of Arizona, which I did not vote against. I voted to certify Arizona because I had no reason to think that there were the breaches that occurred in Pennsylvania. Now, let's just understand this, and you're right in various ways. There was absolutely no chance that any certification or election was going to be overturned. All right, because how the rules work, the Democrats had the majority. They, of course, were going to vote for that, and then we would have needed 2/3 of the Senate to also affirm that the electors for that particular state should be decertified. There was no chance of that happening. Now, why then did I vote to decertify, not to certify Pennsylvania? There's no question when the Capitol was stormed, and it was, led by, not everybody that entered the Capitol that day, many were stupid, many were mistaken, many of them made huge errors, but there were some that were leading it that were there for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to cause mayhem, destruction, and they were lunatics. And I saw them up close. I saw them real close, right through the House door that I was helping fortify, for crying out loud. So I had no love lost for what occurred that day. Now, jump forward to 1 o'clock in the morning. Why then, after all that, would I continue with, in the end, was a symbolic vote, right? Because nothing was going to change. After all that, and it was a really, really tough decision. And I left it up to the last line of my speech. I could have easily just said, in my speech, by the way, I spoke to Nancy Pelosi was up there, and I said, Speaker, I'm quoting your words from 2004, 2012, the last 3 Republicans that won the presidential election. There were a number of Democrats that opposed the certification. I mean, it's on record. We can see it. And I'm quoting your words in your defense of that because some people feel disenfranchised. I read them back to her. And I could have easily said at the end, under today's circumstances, I will now, however, leave it up to the courts. But instead I said, because of what I believe was clearly unconstitutional actions taken in Pennsylvania by our Secretary of State, I cannot put my approval because of the Electoral Act of 1887, which I think you guys are familiar with. The Electoral Act of 1887, because this occurred in 1876, the votes were close. The Electoral Act of 1887, and I've read it many times, said if the certifications are not given regularly, then members during the certification process have the right to oppose. Now, define regularly, written in 1887. So I honestly felt I was following the guidance given in the laws and the actions taken unconstitutional. But I'll just finish with, do I have regrets about it? pretty much every day. But I don't know if I would have done anything different given another chance under the circumstances.
Talking about the electoral law, I mean, there has been a debate about changing
Yes.
some of the ways this thing works to get rid of some of the, kind of disagreement about how to interpret it.
Vagueness,
Do
absolutely.
you favor
I do.
changing that law?
I sure do. And I don't like how they plan. It should be very clear. Look, what Mike Pence did that day, by the way, was courageous, everything else. Okay? I think the world of Mike Pence. He's actually coming here on October 27th. He's going to do an event for me. His brother I served with, Greg Pence, came in with me, a real good friend. But anyway, I do. And it should be, it needs to clarify. It should just say, look, the states certify and that's it, right? Or say, here are the criteria for opposing.
Still on elections. So if Trump runs in 2024, will you support him?
A smart conservative once said that they were going to support the most conservative candidate that can win. I don't know. I honestly don't know. We're focusing on winning the 22, winning right now and winning the House. There's no question that I think President Trump's policies strengthen America and were in the interests of the United States. And honestly, I met with him many times in a 2-year period. A first-term member of Congress, I was with him probably 15 different times. And I found him to be determined, sincere, and putting country first. So there's no question what occurred during the course of those elections are things that we all have to take into consideration. So all I can say is we shall see.
It's not a no.
No.
What if he's the nominee of the party?
Well, again, you know what, I care about policy and results for the vast, if not all, vast majority of Americans, if not all. So I want to see policy that will, once again, being repetitive here, strengthen America. And Joe Biden's plan has weakened America. And their plan is to continue to do more of the same. So yeah, I'll be for the candidate that wants to send us in a far different direction, and that means energy independence. That means not attacking, assaulting our domestic energy industry. That means securing the border, which it was, by the way, in 2019. I was there. There were like 1,800 coming across a day, where today it's 7,000, 6,000. It's an absolute mess, and the level of drugs and everything else, and they're not doing anything about it, which is inexcusable and shameful.
So you don't see anything that happened on January 6th and Trump's role in encouraging that as disqualifying?
I think he should have canceled the rally. I think maybe Speaker Pelosi should have said to cancel the rally or gone public with it. I don't know if he would have listened. I think Nancy Pelosi should have had the National Guard surrounding the Capitol. And I'm honestly not trying to be political here and pass blame. I've had these conversations with Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney in Washington, her office right next to mine. Liz has been up in my district fundraising for me. I still like her, still have respect for her. But I think this January 6th committee was a kangaroo court. There was no. I told my staff not to come in that day because I heard rumors. I had nothing solid. I didn't have any classified meeting. I didn't have any declassified meeting. Nobody came to us, not even Lita McCarthy. But the Capitol Police asked the Sergeant of Arms on January 4th for National Guardsmen. It's on record. And and the national, the Sergeant of Arms reports to Nancy Pelosi, and they said no. I think that would have been a reasonable thing to discuss.
It
Pardon me?
seems pretty clear Nancy Pelosi can't call out the National Guard. The president and the governors can call out the National Guard, right? But Nancy Pelosi has no power
This
to
is
call
more-
in the National
the
Guard.
Department of-
We've seen that video just last night where she's calling governors to ask them to bring in the National
Well,
Guard.
and they
She
did.
has no power
Well, and they
to call in the
did.
National
They
Guard.
did, but it was a little late. I'm not blaming this on Nancy Pelosi. I am
You're
telling you
kind of
though,
blaming someone for being
Cap-
too late in calling the police.
Capitol
Instead of
Police-
the person who instigated
the
issue.
Capitol Police, I'll send you the record if you want to see it. The Department of Defense on January 2nd, and I had it on my desk, I read it, told the Capitol Police, asked the Capitol Police if they want, and I might be missing a little bit here, if they wanted the National Guard. On January 2nd, the Capitol Police said no. On January 4th, the Capitol Police called the Sergeant of Arms and said, do you think we should have the National Guard? And the Sergeant of Arms said no. That's a fact. So whoever had the authority, I guess you'd have to say it's the president. But
Wasn't the Sergeant of Arms relieved of his duties right after
yeah,
this?
he was. Okay, but we still didn't have the National Guard. And look, he should have canceled it. I'm not saying there's no blame there. Now, I will tell you this though, the lunatics leading the charge that I saw smashing down doors while Capitol Police had firearms pointing at them, okay, were not people you'd see at a typical Trump rally. These guys had backpacks. He had like an oxygen mask on him, and a few of them, evil in their eyes, and they did not come there because of that speech. They came in there with days of preparation. That's really my only point. There are some that say he wouldn't be legally permitted to run for president. There are some that say they'd appeal it out until after the election. I really don't know.
Do you think it was an abuse of power to conduct that raid at his home or search?
I'll say, and I'd say this in private. Perhaps I don't know all the details, but it sure seemed excessive, and there was correspondence taking place. I mean, the FBI is on record for being in the room or telling them to put a big lock on the door where the quote-unquote classified or declassified materials were. They floated right afterwards, which minimized their credibility that there were nuclear codes, right? They put that out, so that got into the media, which turned out to be completely false. To build their case or their public sentiment, I don't know, stupid. And I think the DOJ could have got about it a lot better, right? Like McCarthy says, bring in the 8, and let them know what's taking place here. Make it a little bit more public. I'd like to see the letter sent to the former president's Secret Service, who were there, armed, stating that if these documents are not returned, we're going to be forced to take them by force or by legal means. I'd like to see that letter. That letter would be meaningful to me. And you know what? I don't think that letter exists.
Don't you think it's clear, though, that these talks about these documents have gone on for months? It would appear from the record that there were denials that there were more of these documents still at Mar-a-Lago, which apparently there still were.
If they're not national security, look, they should go through them then. Bring in the archive people and go through them. Absolutely. Okay, that's not the president's property. Even if it is, it should be done in a reasonable way. Some say it was. Some say some of that was taking place. Some say it doesn't. It wasn't. So, they have this new master or whatever they call it, we'll see where it turns out. But I don't think there's any question that it seemed like a very excessive and harsh and abrupt action. And by the way, you know, we go back to Hillary Clinton and the servers and Bill Clinton's house and all the access they had, and Comey coming out saying, oh, well, what she did was really bad, but we're not going to prosecute. That was classified information.
I don't think we're gonna get into the weeds on what was classified and what wasn't, but I think we should keep going, because we're
Let's
starting
move on
to come to the end
to
here.
abortion. Do you, what is your position on abortion? And do you support federal legislation, or do you want to just leave it to the states?
Yeah, I mean, it should be a state issue. Look, that's always been the claim, right? Have the Supreme Court go neutral, and that's really what happened. All right, people say, oh, Roe versus Wade was overturned, and that's true. But the Supreme Court went neutral on the right or the non-right for abortion. So therefore, if it's not 10th Amendment, it goes back to the states. I am pro-life, however, with exceptions. And the one guardrail that I think most people agree with, that perhaps the federal, well, not perhaps, Jesus. You know, we did put forth a petition for the right amount of signatures. Majority of the signatures would have required a bill to come to the floor for a vote on late-term abortions and partial birth. And we did it twice in this past Congress. And every Republican voted or signed it, and not one Democrat signed it. So I think we got some extremism on both sides here. You know, I would appreciate, and what I advocate for regularly, is doing our best to create a culture of life, right? I mean, adoption services, support for new single mothers, new parents, real support. You know, all we heard when this passed was companies saying how they were going to pay people to drive to other states to get abortions. You know, and this sounds a little bit harsh, but, you know, I feel as if they've become, you know, instead of pro-choice, instead of being a party of pro-choice, they're becoming a party of pro-abortion. So that bothers me. So, look, I do think it just should be a state issue, and if the federal government gets involved in some sort of guardrails and guidelines, I'll take a look at what's proposed.
So how about the proposal by Lindsey Graham for a
15 weeks.
15 weeks, what's your position on that?
Well, I will tell you this, you know, the next day there were headlines, even in local papers, I'm not sure about the CV. Republicans bill to ban abortion nationwide. That was pretty untrue, all right? That's not what it was. It was 15 weeks with various exceptions. Now, 15 weeks, you think about it, it's almost 4 months, it's past a trimester. Not exactly a harsh consideration, but it was a bill, which tends to be a proposal, which tend to be worked on. So, you know, why Lindsey Graham presented that, I don't know. I think it should be, again, states' rights, but with consideration for the extremity of the guardrails, as I suggested.
Do you support any gun control measures?
Sure. You know, I just want law-abiding citizens to that have their mental faculties to be able to purchase firearms. You know, we have the background checks. They're good. They're not great. I mean, I don't know why we don't hire Google or something like that, or these credit card companies seem to be able to catch people pretty fast if there's no flaws or minimal in their systems. The National Instant Check program should be flawless. But look, I'm a avid supporter of the Second Amendment. For a lot of reasons. I'm a hunter. I'm a gun owner. You know, I learned to shoot when I was very young. My dad was a police officer. I honestly think the NRA is about gun responsibility and gun safety. You know, obviously somebody could argue that point, but that's what I think they're about. I think they're given, well, I'm going to get into this, but given entirely too much. You know, it's often you hear people say, "Oh, you're just being led. You're being directed by the NRA," and it's totally ridiculous, frankly. And but I certainly respect my constituents' views on the Second Amendment and the fact that it's the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution.
How did you vote on the bipartisan gun legislation?
I voted against it, and I will tell you this, there were a lot of good points in it, but I'll just tell you quickly why I voted against it. And I was telling my staff, I had them, we were discussing this all day. In the end, see, red flag, even the definition, forsakes due process. So if you said your neighbor is crazy, drinks and comes out on his lawn and shoots off fireworks and fires off his weapons, that's enough under that law for the police to knock on his door and not necessarily take his guns, but if that person, I don't know, cursed at him or didn't like him, or if the cop didn't like that particular neighbor, they then can bring that person in and take him to a local judge, like in our case, one of our
Magistrate.
local district magistrate, right? And they can confiscate the guns. But there was no evidentiary standard in that, and not a true level of due process, like the district attorney or an actual judge. So that's why I was against it. But there are other things that can be done. You know, if somebody gets arrested, their guns get taken from them, right? So, you know, police do have that level of authority that exists already. And it probably should be enforced more. I mean, I'm like anybody else, okay? Democrat, Republican, Independent. A school shooting takes place, these mass shootings, not just that. Now, you know, our biggest problems, and those are horrific problems, but our biggest problem is what's going on in our city streets, right? Armed robbery. And Mary Gay Scanlon, member of Congress, held up at gunpoint by 3 people. 2 of them were under 17, 1 was 18. They were all out. The under 17 were out in 2 days, or a day. The 18-year-old was out in 2 days. Tell me how that makes sense. Not just because she's a member of Congress, any individual. So we have weak prosecutors. I mean, I have to tell you about Krasner and you know what's taking place there. It's just we need to be tougher on crime. And
How can the federal government address these weak prosecutors?
Well, good question. Good question. You know, of course, the Senate has its role in. That's why the majority of the Senate matters for judges. We need to. There is legislation that can pass that can hold prosecutors to the letter of the law. We're discussing that right now. We also, in our Commitment to America, we have funding for 200,000 or 300,000 more officers. I mean, you know, all you gotta do is turn on the TV and see in Philadelphia, the Benevolent Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, the unions, they're totally demoralized. They have less applicants than before. And they don't have enough police. And when they do arrest somebody, they're out the next day. So, and Chicago, the number of shootings and everything else. But back to your question, yeah, look, I'm for the background checks. Tim Scott put forth a bill, the Justice Act, that I was completely for. And then the Democrats, I hate to put it that way summarily, but the Democrats had a problem with qualified immunity. I mean, that's just wrong. You can't do that. I mean, if I walk outside and some guy is robbing a lady's purse, and I take that guy and throw him against the wall and he cracks his head, that guy can sue me. If a police officer does it, they should be able to get sued. And that's what removing qualified immunity does.
Can you talk about immigration, where you want to see U.S. policy on immigration?
It was working. First install, remain in Mexico. Certainly some sort of fencing and border matters. Just ask CBP. I meet with them often in Washington, and I've been to the border. So the remain in Mexico. We also need to engage the Mexican government, as was done under President Trump, to help secure their southern border and the northern border and be more acceptable. We should help pay for their asylum adjudications that take place. Just very simply, people need to be turned around. Word needs to get out. And Obama did that. Obama started putting people on buses, on airplanes, sending them back. People stopped coming. And the level of drugs that are coming across. I mean, this thing is so ugly in so many ways. Honestly, you talk to any CBP member, they'll tell you. I mean, these people they're giving up their life savings. They're coming across. They're carrying drugs with them. They're coming in different groups. I mean, it's sort of a strategic march to the least vulnerable. Who can make it across best is the one carrying the drugs. The weakest ones, the kids, are being thrown in the river. So CBP has to go after them. So to keep them from drowning. So it's just a terrible situation that it's insane that we're permitting this to continue. And Republicans like me and many others, once we secure the border, we should they love talking about comprehensive immigration reform. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's get comprehensive. You've had the House and the Senate, by the way, and the White House for the last 2 years, but you got to have border security first. You announce amnesty, we'll have twice as many at the border. So it's almost that simple. Obviously, still difficult, but that would correct the situation.
What about increasing legal immigration to help?
I'm okay with that. Farmers are looking for extended work visas. The H-2A, the H-2Bs. We've been talking about for a long time. Yeah, I mean, those that are here, I'd be okay with a lot of things. I'd be okay with the Dreamers Act. You got to secure the border first. And because the honest truth is, look, we want to yell and say, oh, they didn't wait their turn, they didn't do it how others are doing it. True, but they're here, and if we're going to be realistic, we're not going to send them back. We're not sending 10 million people back. So we need to make them legal, we got to get them paying taxes, but you got to secure the border first.
And can you talk about what is your opinion on the Biden administration and how it's handled Ukraine?
Good question. Well, initially terrible. I was very close to it as this was developing. Many like bringing in Afghanistan and the debacle that occurred there and the weakness and everything else, and that gave Putin the idea that this might be the right time for him to go. I've had many classified meetings on this, so I'll avoid offering some of that. But the most disappointing thing to me was when Tony Blinken and others, Secretary of State, said we're negotiating with the Russians and we gave them our We gave them the plan, we gave them conditions, and we're waiting for their response. Said that to us in a committee hearing. Well, they didn't make that proposal, or not a treaty, public. We only could view it in a classified setting. So I allocated myself a couple of hours. I wanted to go down and really read this. It was a couple of days in, I was looking forward to reading it. I went down, and I think I can say this, it took me about 16 minutes to read, and it was a damn joke. It created no deterrence. There were no or else's in better terms, perhaps. So the invasion took place, and I've been to the border. I've been on the Ukraine border on one of my trips to Moldova. It's an incredibly serious situation, particularly for those border nations, as you can imagine, because they think if Putin wins, they very well could be next. So when you're worried about energy and food, which is what they're very concerned with, but invasion goes to the top of that list, right? They're dealing with tens of thousands of refugees that they're caring for. And I'll tell you what, I saw some of these camps in Moldova, one of the poorest countries in the world. They were caring for the Ukrainians, and it was only women and children, right? No men there. Men were all back fighting. I met a kid, he was 16. He was speaking in Ukraine to his mother, and she was like, stop. And the interpreter said, he's telling his mother he's running away, he's going back, he's going to go help his father. You know, crazy, just awful. And so Putin is a you know, the brutal, come up with any words you like regarding what a terrible tyrant he is. And the Ukrainians have stood up, and so we got to be there for them. I know this is getting a little bit political, but I did vote for the original $40 billion. I mean, they're targeting civilians, they're killing people, they're raping people, they're trying to demoralize the Ukrainians. I mean, it's strategically a problem. I mean, Ukraine, granted, they're not a NATO nation, but you got Odessa there, which is a really important port for a number of countries. Moldova's one of them, Romania, and we got to do everything we can to supply to Ukrainians what they need to stop them. Now, one thing that I'm very vocal about in our classified and declassified meetings with Department of Defense, with Secretary of State, with everybody, is that they got to provide us very clearly and honestly the amount of funding that our NATO allies are providing, funding and supplies, because as tough as we want to be with giving defense weapons to Ukraine, we got to make sure our NATO allies are paying up as well, because they're in more jeopardy than anybody, and right now they're not. They're behind. So they should at least be equivalent to us, for crying out loud. But anyway, so it's a bad situation. And I will say this, that the Biden folks have come around. They didn't want to be provocative, was the word, but we're now supplying in a manner that is clearly helping the Ukrainians win. Sue, what time is it?
Yeah, we're almost, it's 12:30.
Okay. You guys kept me for a while.
You mentioned Mike Pence was coming in to campaign for you. Do you have any details on that?
Yeah, he's like I said, he's a great American. He's helping out in a few states. I mean, probably many states. And he's coming in on October 27th. I have invitations going out. It's an event / fundraiser, and so we're having it locally, and he's coming in for a lunch and a round table discussion, and also I'm happy to have him.
Can you say what town?
It's at Isabella's.
I guess we're out of questions. It's been an hour and a half, so
Yeah, you guys grilled me pretty good.
Thank you for your time. And you see if you come in, you know, more often than every 2 years,
All right.
short.
I'll come in
No problem.
anytime.
No
And
problem.
you guys are important, you know, I mean, you got a paper that's widely read and it's important, so I'll be happy to.
Sure.